And good evening. Today is August the 20th. Right now it is 7:35, and I'm calling to order this evening's meeting of the Guilford Planning and Zoning Commission. For the benefit of those who have not participated in a planning and zoning meeting, our procedures are as follows. The secretary will read the legal notice of the meeting as published in the local newspapers. The applicant will be invited to come forward and present the case, explaining to the commission and others present what is being requested of this property. Comments of town agencies will be read for each application if there are any. First, there'll be clarifying questions from the commissioners, and then there will be an opportunity for clarifying questions from the audience. Next, we'll have those who want to support the application come forward. Second, we'll ask those opposing the application to come forward. As this is a public meeting and must be recorded, it will be necessary for speakers to identify themselves by stating their name and address before addressing the commission. The applicant will then be free to leave or remain for the balance of the public hearing and the regular meeting, during which the commission will try to reach a decision on each application. Each applicant will be notified in writing as to the decision of the commission and has the right to appeal to Superior Court if desired. Decisions of this meeting are available the day after the meeting by calling the Planning and Zoning Office at 203-453-8039 after 9 a.m. Seated tonight are the following members of the Guilford Planning and Zoning Commission. We have Walter Corbiere, I'm Rich Meyer, we have Tom Cost, we have Richard Wallace, Ray Bauer, Frank DeAndrea, and Josh Hirschman. Staff tonight joining us is George Krell, Reggie Reed, Katie Arbuckle, and our videographer is Shannon Gale tonight. Mr. Secretary, please read the notice.
Legal notice, Guilford Planning and Zoning Commission. Notice is hereby given that the Guilford Planning and Zoning Commission will hold a public hearing on August 20th, 2014 at 7:30 p.m. at the Nathaniel B. Green Community Center, Monunketuck Room, 2nd floor, 32 Church Street, Guilford, Connecticut, for the following purposes. Number 1, Guilford Sportsmen's Association, 501 Hart Road, map 111, lot 2, zone R8. Special permit, remove one-story building and replace with 2 stories, section 273-13. Number 2, amend section 273-2, table 5, and add section 273-22F, adult-oriented facilities. Copies of these applications are available for inspection in the Office of the Planning and Zoning Commission, Town Hall South, 50 Boston Street, Guilford, Connecticut. At this hearing, persons may attend and be heard, and written communications will be received. Dated at Guilford, Connecticut, this 16th day of July, 2014. Richard Meyer, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you for everyone for coming tonight. It's nice to see so many faces. Do I have a motion to open the public hearing for Guilford Sportsmen's Association?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Meeting's open. Do we have a presenter for Guilford Sportsmen's Association?
For the record, my name is Robert Biagino. I'm an architect. I have a practice in Guilford, Connecticut. I'm representing Guilford Sportsmen's Association in regards to our proposed 2-story building, replacing an existing 1-story non-code compliant building. I have return receipts. The notice will be sent out. I photographed the existing 1-story building. It's a slab on grade, has electricity, no water, no heat, no gas. The purpose of this building is to prepare members who are going to go out skeet shooting, go inside the building, check in, do the administration paperwork. When they're ready, they go outside. So basically, it's a place of called public assembly. And so what we'd like to do at this point in time is make it code compliant. Take down the existing slab and grade building. Be able to build on the first floor, same administrative open area where the members will come in. Give them at least 2 handicap ADA compliant bathrooms, both the male and female, because of the occupancy load. Energy efficient now, because now we're able to bring gas to the site, water to the site. We're building a little storage room for some maintenance mowers to take care of their grass here along the whole site. They have 180 acres in Guilford, and they have another 140 in Mass. And so I have a lot of property maintained. It's included at the end of 501 Hart Road. We meet the scheduled table for our R8 zone, which is a residential zone. And because we're in a residential zone, we need the special permit because we're basically extending the non-conforming use. So in terms of minimum 160,000 square feet, well, we got 7 million square feet. So we meet those requirements, we meet the setbacks, et cetera. The idea is to take this building down, put the 2-story building. First floor will be used for the same use as long as we're building building on the exact same footprint, we'd like to build basically an office administrative area in the upper level for sending paperwork, files, etc. Basically, it's a wood frame building, has easy character to fit in the rest of the site. The existing, there's a loading dock, etc., which is this area into here. This is the rear of the property. It's all remaining, so we can still drive up. We're simply replacing it. The underground service that goes to the site is right against this building, so this wall will be remaining, and we're just going to build around it. So it's basically replacing something that doesn't meet code, it doesn't meet energy efficiency, none of those products, and now give them a code-compliant building which will satisfy their needs for the future. Basically, there's no increases in number of members, so there's no increase in terms of parking, etc. We're going to reuse the site as it is, and some of the members are here to speak. If there's any questions about how the facility is used, if there's any questions. So the simplest form is replacing an old building that that had its time.
Yeah, Gino said, mentioned that this is non-conforming use. That's not correct. This is a nonprofit recreation facility, which is a special permit use in residential zones.
Okay.
Thank you for your clarification.
I have a question. Is this building actually visible to anybody other than the members of the club? In other words, it's not going to, there are no houses nearby?
There's no houses. I
So
think
it's basically in the middle of
It's
nowhere?
in the middle. I think we're a couple, we're 1,000 feet a week from the front gate, minimum. And there's nothing around for, you never look at it. I mean, you never find it, realistically. So it's basically it's a low-key building. It was always low-key, and it's just going to be just a little taller this time around.
It's the RN zone, so it meets all of the required setbacks and lot coverage, et cetera, right?
Yes,
It's a large lot.
because lot coverage is total floor area is 10% or less than 1%.
All right.
Total site, so, and the setback, I don't even know where the exact property line is, so I know we're over the 50 feet. So we meet all the requirements.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Just the septic, where is it now, where is it?
There is no septic at all. What we have is we did test holes with Dennis Johnson, and we'll submit the engineer site plan, which was prepared on Friday. We met with Dennis Johnson, did the test holes on Thursday. When he comes back with his vacation, he'll review it, but it meets his requirements. And basically, the septic system, per the rural drawing, is sitting right into here, in a grass area, site dead level flat. So we did the test holes, and and we've done kind of a letter saying he's receptive to our design. So we know we meet the requirements.
Mr. Chairman, I have a letter here from Dennis Johnson, Director of Health, Guilford Director of Health, dated August 14th to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Our subject, Guilford Sportsman's Association, 501 Hart Road, map 111, lot 2. Soil test conducted on the applicant's property on August 13, 2014 revealed suitable conditions for installation of a new septic system to serve the proposed two-story skeet range building. Based upon the soil test results and site plan review, it is recommended that the applicant's proposed special permit be approved.
Is there something on the back of that, sir?
You want me to do Kevin's too?
Why not?
Mr. Chairman, I also have a letter in the file from Kevin McGee, our environmental planner, RE this special permit application. The application is proposing to create a preparation area for outside skeet and trap shooting, replace a one-story structure with a two-story structure, and install a sanitary system. The work is being conducted approximately 180 feet from wetland. The plans provided do not show soil and erosion control measures as required by Section 273-97B, subsection 6 of the zoning regulations. In order to make sure that the wetlands are protected, I recommend the following conditions of approval. Number 1, soil and erosion control measures shall be installed around disturbed soil areas. And number 2, the Town of Guilford zoning enforcement officer shall be notified to inspect the sedimentation and erosion control measures prior to site construction. Soil stockpiles shall be contained by silt fencing and/or hay bales. Soil erosion and sedimentation control measures shall be maintained until vegetation is established or suitable material is installed to the satisfaction of the zoning enforcement officer.
So we're 180 feet from wetlands and still having erosion and siltation measures?
Why is that?
Why is that?
Well, if you get a lot of rain, you're going to get sediment going into the pond. There's a huge pond there. If you look at well, I guess it's not showing it. We saw it on GIS. There's a very big pond on the property, and it's
So-
in front of the clubhouse, which is across the driveway from where this building is.
So we feel that there's going to be some runoff from the construction going into the pond.
That's what our erosion and sediment control regulations say.
Okay.
You're okay with that as a condition?
Yeah, I spoke to Kevin, and I showed the detail how to do it. I wasn't sure the extent of the septic system, so I said, yeah, we'll put it around the areas of construction, which is basically our septic system, because we're not excavating for the building, we're simply taking it down. So we have no problem making a condition of putting silt fence.
To the satisfaction of the zoning?
Yeah, we don't think it's a major thing, but the client agrees it's not an issue.
Good,
Okay.
thank you. Anything else? Last chance, any questions? Walter? Would anyone of the audience have any questions? Any comments for? Any comments against? Oh, yes. Could
Thank
you
you.
come up here, please?
Sure.
Tell us who you are and,
Paul Jacobson, I'm the current president of the Guilford Sportsman's Association. The club has existed on the current property since the early 60s. This building has been in existence well beyond the years that I've been there, since 1998. And we want to improve the conditions for the current membership and also comply with any current environmental concerns. And we feel it's in the best interest of our club members and the town.
that's great.
Thank you.
Is that it, sir?
That's it.
Wonderful, that's great. Anyone else speaking for? Anyone else speaking against? All right. I have a motion to close the public hearing on the Guilford Sportsman's Association.
So moved.
All those in favor? Aye. Can I have
Thank
a Thank you very much. Can I have a motion to open the public hearing on, okay. On the adult-oriented facilities?
So moved.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
Favorite subject.
that's great. George, are you presenting for us?
I will, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe you all have a copy of the proposed adult facilities regulation dated July 7, 2014. We have talked about this before. I believe you're familiar with it. I'll review the highlights of the proposed regulation. I'll also submit for the record a number of studies of this topic that I've researched in preparation of this material that document the fact that adult facilities do have the potential to have an adverse impact on joint properties and therefore lend themselves to the type of regulation that we're proposing here tonight. And I also have some maps that I prepared which show the impact of one provision of this proposed regulation, the 1,000-foot setback from any residential zone line. I'll show you the impact of that on the various zones in which this use is proposed to be allowed. The first part of this regulation is to expand the definition of adult-oriented facilities. There is a definition currently part of the zoning code. This proposal expands that definition somewhat. It defines a little bit more precisely what is meant by a facility that's primarily a facility, an adult-oriented facility, and it also includes a reference and a definition of sexually explicit content, which this regulation attempts to regulate uses that engage in the sale of or the provision of entertainment related to sexually explicit content. The Federal Trade Commission has a definition of sexually explicit content, which is repeated in this particular proposed amendment. The gist of what we're proposing to do with this is to amend Table 5, which you'll recall is the table of permitted uses in commercial or non-residential zone districts, by allowing adult-oriented facilities in the I1, I2, TS, and TS2 districts, subject to regulation, which I'll explain in a minute. You'll recall that under our current regulations, adult-oriented facilities are not specifically regulated. And what that means is that a retail store that sells adult-oriented products is treated like any other retail store, and therefore is allowed in any zone in which retail stores are permitted. And that is much more liberal than this provision. This regulation does not allow adult-oriented facilities except in those zones that I just mentioned, I1, I2, TS, and TS2, and subject to further restrictions, which I'll explain in a minute. So this eliminates the open-ended nature of our current regulation, which, as I said, allows these types of facilities in all commercial zones where retail stores are permitted. The purpose of this regulation, I'll read to you. This is new, adult-oriented facilities. The purpose and findings. It is known that adult-oriented facilities, as defined herein, have the potential to cause adverse impacts on adjacent property, reducing property values, increasing crime, and impeding the development of the town in accordance with the plan of conservation and development, or development and conservation. Furthermore, the concentration of such facilities in one area increase the likelihood of such adverse impacts. Therefore, the development of adult-oriented facilities shall be subject to the following additional standards. No such facility shall be located closer than 1,000 feet to any residence or residential zone district boundary line. This standard shall not, however, preclude the creation of a residential use within the 500-foot setback subsequent to the establishment of the adult-oriented facility. So a property owner would not be penalized if an adult-oriented facility were to be located in Guilford. They would not be penalized by virtue of the restriction on residential use if they wanted to establish one after the residential use was after the adult-oriented facility was already in existence. With respect to that bullet point, there are two other possible changes that I think might be considered to this regulation in order to make this a little bit more clear. Where we say residential zone district boundary, we have certain zoning districts which allow residences and other uses. They're called mixed-use zone districts. We have three different zone districts which are mixed-use zone district. And it would be my suggestion that in addition to the residential zone district language, we also add the mixed-use zones as subject to this 1,000-foot separating distance provision. And then we also add town boundary to this provision, so that no such facility can be located closer than 1,000 feet to a town boundary. That does have a bearing, an effect on one of the TS2 zoning districts that we have, which I'll show you in a minute. This regulation also would not allow any such facilities within 1,500 feet of any existing or approved adult-oriented facility. So in addition to the 1,000 square foot or the 1,000-foot separation from residential zone district boundary line, there's also 1,500 feet separating distance from any existing adult-oriented facility or created one. This regulation limits the hours of operation of such facilities to 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Saturday. The proposed regulation prohibits the sale of alcohol in any adult-oriented facility, and also limits the size of any such facility to not more than 10,000 square feet. The procedure for creating an adult-oriented facility shall be in accordance with the Article 9 site plan review, so that any applicant would have to prepare a site plan subject to the rules and requirements of the site plan section of our code. And the commission is required to hold a public hearing in considering an application for a site plan application for an adult-oriented facility. that's the text of the proposed amendment. I'd like to now walk you through the effect of this amendment on the currently existing TS2, TS, and industrial zones that we have in Guilford. The first one, and I'll pass this material around. The first sketch that I have here is a drawing showing the TS2 zone, the newly created TS2 zone on the property known as Sullivan North. This is a TS2 district of approximately 35 acres that was created several months ago. The 1,000-foot separating distance from residential zone would not permit any such adult-oriented facility in that TS2 zone. As you can see there, the closest of any such facility to a residential zone line or to the town boundary line, North Branford town boundary line, is 400 feet. So under this proposed regulation, no such facility could exist there. This is a map showing another section, another TS zone district section. Also on the west side of Route 1, that's the section that includes Anthony's Restaurant, a number of other properties along that stretch of Route 1. You can see that the distance between the north boundary and the south boundary of that district is, forgotten what the numbers are there, it's about
200, 700? 200.
200.
Is that right? What does it say? 500.
That's a 700 feet from the north boundary to the south boundary. So again, there's no possibility of any such facility being located in that district which would satisfy the requirement, the 1,000-foot separating requirement. This graphic shows several of the industrial zones that are in the old Whitfield Street area. Also, sorry, I think that's somebody's cell phone. Also, with the showing the approximate distances within those boundaries, and also illustrates there that no such no facility would meet the 1,000-foot requirement there for that for either of those zones. Those are the zones down around the train station that are part of the town center south zone. This is another TS2 zone, small site actually, across the street from the entrance to the recently approved Guilford Commons Shopping Center. That's also showing that there's no possibility of any adult facility locating in that zone to satisfy these requirements.
Well, it's also the transfer station.
So we did have a separating distance from transfer stations, but maybe we should. This map shows the industrial zones that are north of I-95 between Long Hill Road and Church Street, or Route 77, including the Hubbard Road area. And the measurements there also illustrate that there's no possibility of any use being established there. Now we'll turn to a couple properties where such use could be established, and these with respect to the 1,000-foot distance. This one shows the commercial and industrial zones in the Route 1 East area, around the Pinchbeck property, both north and south of I-95. It is possible both north and south of I-95 in the industrial zones, just south of I-95, and also the industrial zone on the north side of 95 between Goose Lane and State Street. It would be possible to establish a facility pursuant to this regulation in that area. And finally, the industrial zone down in the Soundview area. Also conceivable, the measurement is very close actually, much more accurately, much more difficult for me to get an accurate measurement there given the tools that we have, but it's possible that such a use could be established at the intersection of Soundview Road and the crossroad, which is called Shoreline Drive. It's conceivable that such a use could be established there that would satisfy the 1,000-foot requirement. I'd just like to conclude by submitting, for the record at least, some background information on this subject, which establishes the purposes and findings that I mentioned before. This is a report material that was prepared for the town of Guilford a number of years ago, relating to adult establishments, research and other information about them. This is the town of Orange adult touring establishment regulation, which also includes findings and references to research that was done. The Orange model has been upheld in the courts. And finally, a report that was prepared for the town of New Britain, I believe it was. Yes, also discussing sexually oriented businesses and ordinances related thereto, and also includes background information and references to studies and other findings, which I'll submit for the record as well. Finally, let me just conclude by reminding you that this public hearing must be continued, given our requirement that text amendment public hearings are subject to public hearing by at least 2 occasions. So I will recommend to you that you continue this public hearing to September 3rd. And I'm happy to try to answer any questions or...
George, just 2 questions. Did Chuck review this?
No, he did not. Although, you recall, or maybe you, I don't know how this was discussed before. He reviewed the previous draft that we had, and he provided me, along with the town's in-house counsel, a guideline for what should be part of the new regulation.
Okay.
And that was on the basis of that, plus this other information I have is...
So you're confident
Yes.
that this comports with his
I
opinion?
believe it does. yes.
Okay. The other thing is, why are we listing TS and TS2 if it's impossible to put anything in those zones? Why not just take it out?
That's a good question.
I mean, is it
When this
practical?
was originally drafted, I think we were thinking perhaps of a smaller number.
Mhm.
I think we were thinking, in fact, the original proposal had a 500-foot separating distance to a residential zone line. In that case, there would be some possibilities in the TS zones. That's why they were part of the original.
Okay. But I'm just wondering if they should come out, because as you pointed out, it's impossible to get it in there anyways, under these regulations.
Given the current TS2
Right.
zoning, correct. It is. Although, on the surface, it looks more generous on our part if we include all.
Well, I know, but I'm just saying somebody's going to pick that up and say it's just, window dressing.
I had a question. That's on your 1,000, 1,500 feet away. Now, when we were discussing it a few weeks ago, maybe 2 meetings ago, 3 meetings ago, you had said that you had originally recommended 500 feet, right?
This is separating from another one?
Separating, yeah, from another one. And right, didn't you also say 500 feet? I don't know what the other part was. Whatever we were talking about, I just want to make sure that, because this wasn't run by Chuck, that you're confident the setbacks would be permissible
The separating
legally.
distance?
Yes, the separating distance.
He suggested that it would be permissible to have setback distances both from residential zones and residential uses, because there is clear evidence that these uses have an adverse impact. And there's certainly a certain amount of arbitrariness, 500 feet, 1,000 feet, I mean, that's a lot, that's...
But it would
The
be an adverse
reasonableness of
impact.
doing that is clear, and it's also clear that the concentration of these kind of facilities does have an adverse impact, so it's reasonable to require that they be separated from each other. Whether 1,500 feet is the right number or not, or 500 is somewhat of a judgment, I think, on our part.
With a 1,000-foot setback, is there enough available places in town for this to meet the requirement that there is a viable opportunity for this kind of business?
That's a hard question to answer.
I know.
Viable. It's Soundview Road one is really probably not viable, so I think the other, the industrial, the Route 1 I-95 Pinchbeck, I think is a viable possibility.
But
The north side would require some significant development to get to it, because that property is not developed, it has no access right now. The south side, excuse me, would be more reasonable. So I would say yes.
But
Now, where exactly is the south side? What, if I were to think about, where is that located?
You
If I
know
were-
where the greenhouses are? The big old
Oh,
roads?
yeah.
Kind of at the 1,000-foot location, if you went back behind the greenhouse and then went east towards 935, that, in that area back there, you can find a spot that would be 1,000 feet
But-
from a residential zone.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, sir.
But would it be developable? Are there wetlands there?
I don't know.
See, I don't want an establishment in this town, myself personally. But what I'm concerned about is that we make these things so tight that someone takes us to court and finds in their favor because we made them so tight that nobody, in effect, could build one, not one. And
Yeah, that's a good reason why we may want to ask council to review it
Yeah.
one more time. But it would seem that based on council's guidelines and George's careful drafting, that this current draft does meet most or all of those.
Well, I mean, I hope it meets all of them, not most of
Yeah.
them, because somebody will pick this apart, and this is a litigious kind of a lightning rod that attracts this kind of. So I'm just, my only, I don't have a problem with this, but my concern is that we don't blunder into a lawsuit. So if it turns out that somebody takes the time to really look at this thing, who has a large legal budget and wants to sue the town, and they find that as a practical matter, there is no place or one place, you might have an issue. That's my only concern. Otherwise, I would support this 100%. So maybe between now and, since it has to stay open,
Absolutely. I
we
think
can
the
just
question
run.
about what is, you use the phrase as a practical matter, and is it feasible? Those are judgments in themselves. What is it practical? How practical does it have to be? I mean, do you have to have a lot that's right on Route 1 that doesn't require any improvements? We don't have that. We have some property that requires, in the case of the north side, some pretty significant improvements to get to it before it could actually be developed in a realistic way. The south side, not quite as difficult.
And George, isn't this regulation drafted sort of with the understanding of the adverse impacts that the adult entertainment facilities bring into town? So after looking at all the maps and all the zones carefully and taking into consideration the adverse impact, that's where you came up with this?
I believe that's correct.
So are we saying, in this next 2-week period or 3-week period before our next meeting, we want to have Chuck look at this again?
That would be my suggestion, just to cover ourselves and see if he suggests any fine tuning, or if he's ready to bless it, then I think it
Well, I
move
think,
forward.
I agree. I think we need his blessing only because if we blunder, it's going to be tens of thousands of dollars. And I'd rather invest $500 right now and him say, you know what, this is great. I'll be able to sleep at night. I'm sure everyone else will
Yeah,
too.
I agree with Rich.
Rich,
Yeah.
in the history of these two towns, Berlin and New Britain and Southington, were there any legal challenges to these when they were drafted?
Yeah, I think all of them. So
Yeah, I think all-
I don't know all the intricacies.
But were all of them retroactive too? Like, were these done after the fact, sort of?
Some of them were. The Orange was, for example. In Britain, I'm not totally sure.
there's 2 or 3 in Berlin.
Yeah.
There's also at least 2 or 3 in
Yeah,
Berlin.
that's an example of concentration.
Where the 15s. I don't know what the heck it is. I know they were up there.
Okay. All right, thanks, Rich. That's great. Other questions? Does anyone in the audience have any questions for George?
I do.
George, you got a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Don't run off, bud.
I'm not going anywhere. You don't know.
Sorry, Mr. Crowe.
Name and address for the records.
My name is Deborah O'Neill. Have you done any research on the internet at all? I think I briefly spoke to you a bit. I had some personal issues, so I couldn't pursue this issue anymore. But have any of you gone on the internet to look at the cities which were successful in limiting the areas with these types of establishments?
I've looked at a lot of that material. yes.
Okay, so you know the secondary effect is the one that the Supreme Court is the one,
Right,
so and that 1,000 feet is not an unusual distance.
right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Questions, comments? Brian?
I have to ask, George, I didn't thought about it. Brian McGlone, 622 Mulberry Point Road. Just as a question, how do we address, if we have these facilities allowed in the I-1 and I-2 zone, are they considered retail outlets? And if so, I mean, retail outlets are not currently allowed in I-1 and I-2 zones, so are we going to make some kind of an exception for this type of facility? Will we allow other retail and industrial sites?
Well, the effect of this is to allow only this type of retail store, no other type of retail store.
That's a good question, though.
Can we be accused later of spot zoning on this kind of an issue? I mean, and I'll first say, I'm not looking to bring one of these to town, but I just trying to ask some of the questions that I think are going to be brought up.
Well, those are good ones, and that's why I think we want Chuck to just review it to make sure that it...
And especially, Ray, if
Yeah.
you choose to drop the TS and TS2, because it doesn't look like those are practical either, then we're really limiting it to this
Well,
area.
that's right, and the
then
question is-
Now we're introducing a new allowed use that hasn't been allowed, so as long as we can have an exception, we go down table 5, you know, we'll have to clearly lay out this use and then show it allowed in I-1 and I-2 when any other retail use. And retail use in history has been somewhat broadly defined, so, you know.
Good points that, you know, hopefully Chuck will look at for us.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Brian. Steve?
Steve Cobb's on 62 Scottsville Lane. My concern is the same that Tom just mentioned, that it's, and I don't know if that's something that Chuck would look at, but you know, I'm not concerned that, gee, you have to make your own roadway to get in there. I am concerned that if it's the only spot there is in the middle of a pond, it's not going to be doable, and we could get sued on that. So I think we have to look at the geography there as well.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I think it's well done.
Well, maybe what we'll do is, you know, have field trips from time to time. Maybe on some Saturday morning, all go out to the field and back up Pinchbacks and see if this is an appropriate setting.
You did good with the video camera, right? So we can let's take a look at it.
All right, good. Anyone else? No? Is that it? All right.
To recommend that you continue this hearing to September 3rd.
Sure, that's great. Any seconds? All those in favor? Aye. We need to close the public hearing, yes?
No,
We're going to continue it. That's right. Thanks, Katie. She's so wonderful. All right. So that concludes our public hearing portion of our meeting. So now the regular meeting. Do we have a motion for the approval of the revised agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. So let's talk about the Guilford Sportsmen's Association application for this improvement.
Oh, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
while you were deliberating, or actually listening to George, I did find some photographs, aerial photographs in the file of the Sportsman's Club, and just so that you could see the wetland that the environmental planner was concerned about.
I had a feeling it's pretty big.
Yeah, I think it will help settle your thoughts about erosion.
Well, we've already agreed to it, so.
Thank you, Rich.
No, I said, oh, they agreed to do it, so. It's okay.
Are we in deliberations now?
No, we don't have a motion.
Someone care to make a motion?
For this?
Voted that the Guilford Planning and Zoning Commission approve the special permit for the Guilford Sportsmen's Association at 501 Hart Road, map 111, lot 2, for improvements to the skeet and trap shooting area, and a new building is shown on proposed facility 501 Hart Road, dated July 29, 2014, prepared by Robert Mangino, architect. This application is approved with the following conditions. Number one, that soil and erosion control measures shall be installed around the disturbed soil areas. Number two, the Town of Guilford zoning enforcement officer shall be notified to inspect the sedimentation and erosion control measures prior to site construction. Soil stockpiles shall be contained by silt fencing and/or hay bales. Soil erosion and sedimentation control measures shall be maintained until vegetation is established or suitable material is installed to the satisfaction of the zoning enforcement officer. This application is approved based upon a finding that it conforms with the zoning code. The special permit is effective on August 29th and upon filing with the town clerk.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Discussion. Oh, I'm sorry. All right, sorry. Go ahead. Let's discuss it.
Well, it certainly is conforming on a lot that large. There are appropriate measures that are in place to take care of the soil erosion control, which sounds like was the biggest concern of staff.
And that they're willing to do it.
And that they're willing to do that. So we heard no negative input from the public, so I'm in favor of granting it.
I can't see a single reason to say no.
And I think they probably, it would be nicer to have people have bathrooms in general.
Okay.
They don't have bathrooms right
Okay, that's good. Anything else?
Just be straightforward.
Yeah. I can't see a reason to say no. All right, any other discussion?
now. Same footprint as well.
That's right, and he's got the erosion siltation law already agreed to. All right.
Higher than a two-story house.
Exactly, and it's the middle number. Is that it? Last chance? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, none, motion carries. Okay.
That's it.
Thank you.
That's it then.
All right, so the next step is the site plan, yes? And this is South Lane Bistro, 63 Whitfield Street, map 39, lot 94, zone C1, zone plan, site plan modification, create protected entry. This is Will Smith. Yes, it is. Come on down, Will.
Revised historic district. One, I can do it great.
So you're not asking for the waiver of the professionally prepared site plan?
Well, I am in that this has been old A2.
Okay.
So it's a compilation as far as the level of, I would, of course, bring you one. I want to give you a sealed one when it's done. Do you want a couple photos? Would that be helpful? Yeah? So I'm William Thompson, architect, 28 South Fair Street, here in Guilford. I'm here tonight for the South Lane Bistro, formerly was Rancheros. This is on Whitfield Street, 63, down the alley, kind of in that restaurant zone. About a half a year ago, we were here for site plan review to basically make an outdoor patio area, which has had a really big impact and doing very well.
And tonight, what we're looking to do are two things. We'd like to create a year-round vestibule for people waiting. Now that once the weather starts to change, it's going to become pretty significant. And we'd like to look at some seasonal enclosure for the patio to extend the season in the spring and fall. They have a number of seats there that people are finding they really like that. We don't want suddenly the patio to be closed. We're a bit concerned that people think, oh, if the patio is not open at all, it's going to be too long a wait, I'm not going to go. So we're trying to look at a way to make the season extend a little bit more. We also met with, I met with Reggie Reed, and I also met with Dennis Johnson to review the planning of this addition. This is a site plan. It's a compilation plan, but I've been fairly careful. You can see the small vestibule addition. It's in the middle of the lot, conforms to zoning. It's a private right-of-way. It's been reviewed by the landlord, Craig Ventura, also. He's very in favor of this. In essence, what the width of this vestibule is driven by accessibility rules. So if you go to the sheet with the plan, it's 5'10" by 15.5 feet long. What that does is that still leaves, for the most part, 10 feet clear, except right at this one spot, about 9 foot clear in the alley. This whole application was also reviewed by Historic District Commission tonight, and they approved it. They felt actually it would create somewhat of a focal point without closing the alley down too much. Right now, we have it set up with a single doorway to the Whitfield Street side. There is some discussion of whether it be a second doorway or not. At this point, I'm showing windows on the other two sides. All that would occur here would be just waiting seating, not actual tables for people to eat at. I should also mention it's a paved area, so as far as impervious, it's really the same. We have paving and we have a little bit of roof on it. The design of the vestibule is set up to be subservient and just tie in with the architecture of the building as it is now. So similar details, similar windows, only a little bit glassy. The other thing we're looking at tonight is to create some seasonal enclosure for the patio, which we would create shade-like elements between the rafters, and for inclement weather, clear roll down. It's almost like tent flaps on the sides. We're dealing with several vendors, probably somewhere in the Haven Awning, pretty quality vendor we're looking at. And the concept is the shade devices would be tension between the rafters, and the horizontal ones would be kind of a translucent white material. We did look at one alternate with Historic District in these 4 bays having a rigid translucent panel. They've said that we can tentatively do that if the owners want to, but it would be reviewed by subcommittee. Our preference is to do fabric because it feels more festive and more weight we go through. Condition of the wrap-down enclosure is it cannot be in place more than 180 days. It falls within kind of a temporary structure as far as use, and that is allowed to do with health code and so on. I should mention that when we look at this enclosure, all of the woodwork gets treated with an intumescent sealant so that it's all Class A fire rated. Those are really the key elements.
And you're confident with the compilation of the A2s, you're okay with the setback?
I am, and what I should have mentioned, thank you for bringing this up. On coverage, what I did is I tallied the buildings, and our current coverage allowed is 50%. Our existing right now is 34.2.
with this vestibule, it goes to 34.6. Now, what I did for floor area, we estimated that based on the occupancies of all the buildings on the lot, the layers. If anything, I penalized them in my tally for upper floors, areas that technically wouldn't be called. I counted them. And we're allowed 100%. By estimate, I was at 65.3. This makes it 65.7. So there's a very large margin remaining. And as far, I mean, the only other thing really would be impervious, and we're really not changing anything. We're also not increasing seating. What we're really doing is people right now are sitting out in the alley, and we're putting them under cover.
And that alley, is that property on the other side is owned by the same landlord, same piece of property?
This is all one property.
Okay.
So the alley is actually central, it's private.
So there's no
It's
issue
not
with
a
a
public right.
sideline or anything like that?
Correct.
Okay.
And we should mention that, obviously it could change, but currently the same landlord owns several of the properties.
All right.
And he's very supportive of this.
All right.
If anything, he'd like to consider, I think at another date, one of the other restaurants we need a vestibule. So,
Okay, thank you. I'm all set.
yes.
Can you tell me how wide that alley is?
Right now, yes. It's basically about 1510 right here,
Okay.
and it's about 1410 right there. In other words, at the closest point will be left with 9 feet clear.
Okay.
Is that a paved surface that people?
It's all brick, but it's tightly stacked. And you can see it in the photo, I believe.
Has this been reviewed by the fire department?
No,
Yes,
it has.
the assistant fire chief came to the staff meeting and looked at it.
He has no concerns with fire safety?
By the way, as far as the building code for fire, the exterior does not need to be rated to this. The interior would be 1 hour like the interior of the building. Because it's less than 10 feet, between 5 and 10 feet, that's fine. If you're less than 5 feet, then that's an issue.
Okay, another question about that. In these pictures here, the patio has, I think, there's probably a door there. You could jump over here. I mean, if this gets all, is there going to be any egress off that patio?
There is, and the way the side shelters would work, there's an egress point here, and that will remain. In other words, even with the flaps, that's an opening.
That's right here.
And so you have a way out here and a way out there. And that's the code.
Okay.
It's a relatively small number. We could probably have double the seating before we need another egress.
Is there any means of heating this area?
The thought is they would probably use a couple of pedestal heaters or a couple of radiant heaters from the rafters. Obviously, it all has to be code. And that's, by the way, some of that area could be Class B and some could be Class A, but I've specified all of the material that we treat Class A treatment on that exterior for just your concern, because I don't want any risk there.
What are your thoughts, guys? Any more questions?
I'm all set.
Josh?
Slope or the grade,
It's a very slight pitch. You're talking about, yeah, no, it's enough. It's all a little bit tight. If I had known when we did the first part, I brought up that we wanted great shade, and they didn't, but now things are going well, and they're seeing. But there is enough pitch for that material.
I'm inclined to agree with what you mentioned, was one plus from the Historic District Commission, which is that it creates a focal point along that alley. But are there any additional worries about general congestion beyond just the stark fire safety requirements?
There really aren't huge numbers of people walking the alley at one moment. I mean, you typically will get
one family, and then you might see 2 or 3 during the height of the dinner hour, but it's not something where multiples of people are going down. And if we were to take like egress calculations, we could have hundreds, emptying onto that alley.
The other thing that's worth mentioning, and by the way, I think they're very much the same thoughts I had when I'm looking at it, because obviously we want things to save. You can get out this way. There's a lot of ways out of here. It's not just all the way down the whole alley. So if there were a real emergency, there's access this way too.
Will, do we know if this building is fully sprinkled or sprinklered?
No.
It's not.
No, it's type 5B construction, so protected type 5 construction. And then the separations are, there's the use separations are separated between the different occupancies. Because it's a, it's a multi-use.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that this change would add any occupancy. Obviously, it's the same amount of tables. My only concern is that it's, if God forbid a fire should happen.
Well, let me clarify a little more about what I mean by Class A. It means it does not support flame. So what happens is when you coat literally cedar with this transparent coating, it chars. It creates a char and it stops. It literally, you do a sample and you can see it. And it's highly tested, it has all the code approvals, and there's a number of products like this that have been around now a while. Otherwise, I wouldn't even entertain this.
Okay, good.
Is anybody from Som Siam on board with this?
We reviewed it with the landlord. So, and I would think there have been discussions. In the meeting with the landlord, there were discussions of whether there might be some other vestibule needs for some of the other businesses, but I don't really know the detail of that, and I shouldn't speak out.
Yeah.
So basically, we're saying it's a waiting area, not even service.
That's correct. It allows people to sit down under cover while they're waiting for it.
So no extra septic, no extra.
Correct. If we were to fully enclose, like the patio, then we would revise the septic. Right now, there's an adjacent grease trap, which would change. And everyone's aware, I had those explicit conversations with the establishment owners as well as with Dennis Johnson.
That it? All set? All set, all set. Do we invite any questions from, or no, it's not a public hearing. All right, so.
There's a letter that needs to be read.
I beg your pardon?
There's a letter.
Let's read that letter.
It is dated today, August 20, 2014. And I have reviewed the site plan for South Lane Bistro to add a 5-foot by 10-foot, or 5-foot 10-inch by 15-foot 6-inch vestibule and a seasonal cover to the existing patio area. The vestibule addition does not require additional parking because patrons will not be served food in that area. Since the restaurant space is very small, the 4 seats in the vestibule will accommodate customers waiting for tables. There are no objections to the seasonal enclosure to the existing patio area.
Is that it?
That is it.
Okay, so do we have a motion?
May I add one more thing?
Oh, absolutely.
The plans I gave you today are 820, and they're identical to when we filed, except that a door changed in the vestibule, and there were a couple more details to the coverage. So this is the set that the Historic District approved. I just want to get the dates right.
You're good.
Sorry.
These are based off of the A2s that you produced for that outside patio.
I never produced an A2. I did a compilation from an earlier A2.
So those earlier, when were those earlier A2s produced?
A number of years ago. I could get you the reference. But, I mean, the whole property was surveyed to A2 standard, and that's what we worked from in that earlier.
If I could jump in, I believe it may have been 2003, because the property owner, Craig Maturno, actually combined 2 lots into one, so that you could get lot coverage for the structure he built. without a permit that went to court and was defeated. So I believe around 2003.
You good? All set. Someone like to make a motion?
Sure. Voted that the Guilford Planning and Zoning Commission approve a site plan application for South Lane Bistro, 63 Whitfield Street, map 39, lot 94, for an addition as shown on South Lane Bistro, 4 sheets dated 8/11/14, prepared by William Thompson, AIA. I believe we received new sheets dated 8/20/14. This application is approved with the following conditions: that prior to issuance of a building permit, approval from the Historic District Commission be obtained. This application is approved based upon a finding that it conforms with the zoning code.
I'm going to second that, but before, do we have to waive the professional site plan or no? Because
Well, usually we do that after we approve it.
totally
The
separate.
feeling is that, you know.
Yeah.
Mr. Thompson is it doesn't require a surveyor, it requires a licensed professional, which Mr. Thompson actually is, so
Certainly is.
no waiver required.
There's actually no waiver required at all.
So,
Yeah, see, and,
Well, but you were asking for, it, that was my question. You
well, I
said
was
that-
trying to address that it's technically not A2 because it's from an
Right.
old A2, so it would be technically a compilation. But I think George has got it right and I don't. As far as I didn't need the waiver.
Did you already have permission, approval from the historical district?
Yes.
So we could waive that condition for the record?
But you,
Leave it in there.
obviously you'll get their.
we don't actually
yeah,
have evidence
yeah,
of
we
that.
just
yet,
You don't have
so
the paperwork.
doesn't hurt
Take
anything.
that out.
It's a reminder that way to check the building permit application.
All right, second.
All right, so we have a second. Any other discussion? All done? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Done. Congratulations. Coastal Area Management Site Plan. Mr. Joseph D. Piazza, 25
Is there a
Waterside.
special permit for that, Rich? I just, unless my Sunset Creek.
Ah, yeah. Gotta forgive my eyes, Ray. Thank you. So, special permit, Sunset Creek Development, 353 Stepstone Hill Road, map 92, lot 15, zone R4, R5, special permit, accessory apartment, accessory structure. Section 27319, an office in an accessory structure. 27338A, receive and set a public hearing date, 9/17/14.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Coastal Area Management Site Plan, Joseph D. Piazza, 25 Waterside Drive, map 8, lot 61, zone R2, after the fact Coastal Area Management Site Plan, Stone Steps. Section 27391, receive and set public hearing date, 9/17/2014.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Okay. Set. Correspondence.
Correspondence?
It's my question.
It's your correspondence, sir. Do you want to discuss that? Moratorium
Do you
issue?
want someone else to read it?
Wait a minute,
Have someone else read.
were there any zoning amendments? Did we? They're empty, okay, yeah, okay, sorry.
That's okay, sir. We're good. All right, correspondence. Possible moratorium on hazardous resources. We have a letter from Commissioner Corbier. Walter, you want to read your own letter? You need to?
Oh, yeah, actually, I can refer to it generally.
Yeah, okay.
We've just been through, as you know, Mr. Chairman, we've just been through many months on the Route 1 West Study Committee, and it was stymied in part because we received an application in the middle of it that made it very difficult for our work to go forward. And that applicant had every right to put that application in at that time. And before they put in that application, they also, of course, put in a zoning text amendment, which also began the process of freezing our activities on the Route 1 West Study Committee. At this point, in the wake of that text amendment, as well as the application before the Inland Wetlands Commission, we are, as you know, undertaking a review of hazardous material regulation for the town of Guilford, of which there is very little. when we began this process, of hazardous material regulation, I know that there was some frustration that the process moved very slowly, and a couple of individuals, including Attorney Beatty, who's here tonight, had mentioned that processes that move too quickly make bad law. And I have to say I absolutely agree with that. And our economic development coordinator, Brian McGlone, at the same zoning subcommittee meeting mentioned that we're not in the commercial world, that we are in a volunteer municipal universe when we work on these sorts of regulations, and that it is inevitable that it will take a significant amount of time to get these regulations done. I hope that we can bring economic development interests as well as the actual companies that handle hazardous materials in a collaborative process where we can work at least somewhat as a team to develop the best possible regs for the town of Guilford. But it is very clear that this process requires a moratorium, just as many processes in many towns developing regulations require moratorium. It's very common, as I think all of us know by now, to have moratoria when you have a complicated set of regulations, because otherwise the combination of the threat of a possible application or the reality of an actual application can derail the process. And so for us at this point, I think the most important thing is for us to be respectful of the time of both the Route 1 West Study Committee as well as the other individuals working on hazardous materials regulation, which it may be that it involves as many as 3 committees. I know that the planning subcommittee was canceled this month, which moves our timeline back even farther.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it is a highly technical area. So the only real answer, I know that some people are concerned that this may force the hand of applicants to rush in and make an application. But that threat or that fear continues throughout the process unless a moratorium is put in place at the beginning of the process. Because, in fact, any regulation that may upset or offend or concern a commercial interest could otherwise prompt an application, or worse yet, prompt an interest to threaten to make an application to derail a process in the middle. And that's why we almost always have moratoria, including on the last Route 1 West study committee back in the early 2000s. What was it, 2001? 2002?
2000.
The year 2000 was when it began. The reason we had a moratorium there was for the same reasons that I've mentioned.
Okay. Anything else you want to add? Or? No? We also have a letter from Anthony Cafiero. Would someone like to read this into the record? Josh?
I don't know where it is.
Oh,
yeah, I got it. Dear Chairman Meyer, this is dated August 15th, 2014. It is my understanding the Guilford Planning and Zoning Commission will be discussing a possible moratorium on receiving applications to store LP products in the regular scheduled meeting taking place on Wednesday evening, August 20th, 2014. On behalf of the West End Homeowners Association, I would like to express our support of this proposed moratorium so as to allow Guilford PZ and its subcommittees sufficient time to establish a definition of bulk storage and to study the implications and need for additional bulk storage and transfer of said products here in Guilford, free of any outside pressures and influences from interested applicants. I plan to attend Wednesday's meeting and will be happy to discuss the matter further during the public forum portion of the meeting if need be, but do ask that this correspondence be read aloud and entered into the public record as well. Thank you for your attention to this important matter and for adding the discussion of moratorium to Wednesday's meeting agenda. Respectfully submitted, Anthony Cafiero.
Thank you.
Sorry.
So, let's talk about this briefly. You know, I was fortunate enough to attend one of Mr. Cops's planning meetings a couple weeks ago, and Mr. Anatra was kind enough to speak about, I believe it was you who spoke about what is storage, what is transport. Was that you who took? Definitions, exactly. And, you know, it occurred to me when I was listening to that we really have to be foundational and talk about a lot of stuff to come up with rules. We have to define these things. And, you know, to Mr. McGlone's credit, he's right that we really can't rush through this. Attorney Beatty also. You know, we have to be sure, and we have to be careful of our words, and we have to be sure we're saying what we're meaning and meaning what we're saying. And in order to do that, kind of maybe need to take the pressure off of getting this done with moratorium. So I'm kind of figuring out how we're going to do that. You guys have any input on this? Tom?
I have a bunch of questions. I mean, I think, I'm trying to remember the sequence here, but I think right now that we have, we acted on an application for Sullivan's, and it subsequently ended up in court.
Is that the one on
Is that,
Water
am I
Street?
correct about that, on Water Street?
River Street?
So in fact, there already is an application pending for that property. We denied it. It's now in Superior Court. The court has to decide whether it's going to be, whether to overturn our decision or not. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, is the Sullivan property in the Route 1 West zone?
The River Street property? No.
It's not. My question is a legal one. If we already have an application pending for additional propane storage in Guilford, do we end up putting ourselves at jeopardy because we now try to impose a moratorium while that case is in court?
The moratorium would only affect applications that were received after the effective date of the moratorium. Let me review a little bit what the moratorium is. A moratorium is an amendment to the zoning code. It's subject to the same process and procedure as any other amendment to the text of the zoning code. So you would, if you were to propose a moratorium, you would do so, you would schedule a public hearing on it, on the amendment to create the moratorium. There would be a public hearing on the moratorium amendment. You would then act on it. If you approved it, you would set an effective date for that action. That would be subject to an appeal, but you would set an effective date for it, and that applications receipt, the effectiveness of that moratorium would only apply to applications subsequent to that date.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that came in before that date would not be subject to the moratorium.
Okay.
So
Further discussion.
It wouldn't really have any bearing on any previous applications that were approved.
Yep.
But it's certainly conceivable that there would be applications that would come in before the effective date of that amendment, which would then have to be considered like any other application. And I can clarify that a little bit further. If you have in front of you in your packet, you have a copy of the January 5th, 2000 enactment of an amendment to the zoning code to create the moratorium that Walter just referred to. What the moratorium does is that it says that there are a number of conditions that a moratorium has to meet. But in the case of the moratorium that was created in 2000, it says no site plan applications will be received, considered, or acted upon before a certain date. In this case, September 30th was set as the date in any C2, C3, CD, C4 zones with the following exceptions, and then there's some exceptions to types of applications that would be received. So that during the period between when this amendment became effective, which you see down in the middle of the page there was January 12th.
Okay.
Between January 12th and September 30th of 2000, no applications subject to those conditions and in those zones could be received, considered, or acted upon. So it was a blanket moratorium on all types of applications with these minor exceptions in those zones. And then it goes on to say, and this is all part of the zoning amendment, the amendment is intended, in this case, to suspend major new commercial development during the period when a plan for Boston Post Road, which was a specific project that the town was engaged in, is being prepared. The purpose of this plan is to develop new zoning and design criteria to guide new commercial development in Guilford. This amendment does not include CD zones, those zones not located on Boston Post Road. Then a finding was made, which you see down below. This is actually the moratorium that was created for Route 1 East. I used it as a model to draft a potential moratorium pursuant to Walter's suggestion, which you see also in front of you. But the gist of the moratorium is that it's a zoning code amendment. It's subject to all the same procedures as any other amendment to the zoning text. And a moratorium has to be specific as to what the intent of the moratorium is. It has to be as limited as possible. It has to have an end time period when the moratorium is over, and then there has to be something going on during that period of time during which the moratorium is in effect that deals with whatever the issue is that the moratorium is trying to deal with.
Yep.
So in this particular case, in the case of the Route 1 East moratorium, there was actually a project that the town had engaged in called a plan for Route 1 East. Money was appropriated, as you see down there in the finding, $39,000 was appropriated. There was a contract with an architectural firm from Boston called Icon, and they were, I don't remember the exact timing, but they were either just beginning or had begun work on the document which eventually became the plan for Route 1 East. So that there was something going on, something specific, and it had a time frame that ended, during which time the work that was supposed to get done did get done, and that was the time period that during which no commercial development could occur. So what would be analogous in this particular case is that we would have a provision like the one you see in front of you dated August 19th. Doesn't have to be exactly as it's written here, but the basic gist of it would be no site plan applications as required by Article 10 or Article 9 and so on will be received, considered, or acted upon before a date, set a certain date, whatever that is, for any use involving the bulk storage of propane in any, and you want to specify what zones this is applicable to, or maybe you don't, maybe you say anywhere in the town of Guilford, you can be as explicit or not. What zones the application is, the moratorium is effective in has a bearing on the amount of time that's required for the public hearing notice. If you're doing anything that affects any area of town that's in the coastal management area, there's a 35-day review period required for the public hearing. Similarly, if the moratorium or any zoning amendment affects any property within 500 feet of the boundaries of the town, that has to be noticed to the regional planning agency, and that's also a 35-day notice requirement. Otherwise, the notice requirement, if those are not the case, could be slightly less. And then this amendment goes on to say that the purpose of the amendment is to suspend development of bulk propane storage facilities during a period when the planning committee of the Planning and Zoning Commission, and that could be changed, of course, is studying the issues associated with the development of such facilities, particularly those issues associated with the safety of this use. And this amendment would have an effective date, whatever that is, depends on the schedule of the public hearings, of course. And then we would have to make some findings similar to the findings that were made with the Route 1 East moratorium, which you see on that other piece of paper that you have in front of you. The possible schedule for all of this would be the earliest we could have a public hearing on this moratorium amendment would be September 17th. If we didn't have to do the 35-day notice, I'm sorry, I think that even meets the 35-day requirement. I have to double check that. We'd have to have the public hearing also on October 1st because of our 2 meeting notice requirements, a 2 meeting requirement for public hearings. And if all of that went according to plan and it was approved on October 1st, then it would be effective on October 10th. So that's the schedule. Now, as somebody alluded before, what could happen in this particular case is that between October 10th, which is the earliest this could be done, I think, we could have an application submitted for a propane storage facility pursuant to our current zoning regulations, in which case it would not be affected by this moratorium. So that's the situation that we're in right now, as best as I can understand it.
Okay.
Could I ask another question? I'm kind of curious why, if we're worried about storage, bulk storage, why we're specifically only citing propane. What if I wanted to put a fuel oil tank on a piece of property? What is the definition of bulk storage? Is it 500 gallons? Is it 1,000 gallons? Is it 20,000? What is it?
We've had that discussion before. I believe that our regulations allow for storage in retail sales. At retail sales facilities, we allow storage of, I think it's 10,000 gallons. Is that correct? I'd have to double check that.
I thought it was 1,000.
Is it 1,000?
George, we
Okay,
allow
1,000.
in certain
So
zones.
by implication, anything, or by definition, anything more than 1,000 would be bulk storage.
For sale.
Yes.
Now, if you wanted to put a 20,000 gallon tank in your
Well,
home for home
right.
heating, you could do that.
Right. This doesn't regulate
There's no regulations.
accessory use of propane storage
Or
for
if a commercial greenhouse, for example, wanted to heat the greenhouse with propane and put a 60,000 gallon tank, and they'd be permitted to do that. Because they're not selling.
I think that's correct. That's the way I would interpret it as well.
Good.
And to answer your question, why aren't we equally concerned with other fuels? I don't have an answer for that question.
Well, it gives me the impression that there's a specific reason why we're trying to do this. And in some ways, I don't think this is sort of trying to delay an issue that's been percolating in this town now for a long time. This committee has heard hours of very scientific data presented by a number of groups when Sullivan wanted to put the tank on River Street. I mean, hours and hours of very complicated technical information. And I'm not sure. I'm really concerned about this. I think if it was maybe a shorter period, like 45 days or 90 days, if this is serious as we think it is, then somebody ought to do the work and get it done.
Tom, one of your concerns is that perhaps other hazardous materials would be appropriate for inclusion into the moratorium, for instance, LP gas in general, or natural gas, or fracking waste. I don't know. Whichever. I mean, if the moratorium were more geared towards hazardous, toward likely hazardous material applications, then it would be more palatable. But I did mention LP gas in general in my letter.
Well, supposing the company wanted to come in and there was a zone where it was allowed to store, I don't know, 3,000 gallons of chlorine. that they do something with chlorine. I don't know what happens at the place on Long Hill Road where they do, what's the name of the company? Safety Zone. Before there was a company in there that had a large tank, and I know, I think they actually had a fire there at one point.
Wasn't it nitrogen?
I'm not sure what it was, but, I mean,
Well, the way the proposed regulation is written, it only applies to propane, what we have before us tonight.
Yeah.
So a chlorine company, I guess, could come in, an LP
This is a
company
draft,
could come in.
yeah.
Okay, I
We
mean,
could add those things.
well, I mean, it's hard to comment on this until we get a hard draft that has all the dates, the times, the numbers, specifically what it is that's being proposed. And then I'd like to hear public input on it, both for and or against, if any, before arriving at any decision. But it's hard, I mean, we sort of have something very nebulous before us now. So I think what probably should happen is a more specific draft be done and presented to us at the next meeting for consideration, then determine what the step would be, because it's just too nebulous right now.
You know, to Tom's point about why not push it and get it done in, say, 45 days or some shorter amount of time, there's a fair amount of case law that when a town really rushes through regulations very fast, or when someone builds a case that a town is rushing through regulations very fast, it can be overturned on the basis that the town was being arbitrary and capricious. We've had, I mean, we don't want to give that impression. And I know that Attorney Beatty, who's here tonight, and who was also at the last planning committee meeting, and the one before it, and the zoning subcommittee meeting, and the Route 1 West committee meeting, and gave input at, I think, just one of those meetings. I know that he doesn't want to create the impression that he's trying to build that sort of case, but we want to make sure that under no circumstances do we create an impression like that for anybody involved in the process, and then instead we stay focused on producing the best, most responsible regulations that we can. And that's why we're not going to rush it through in 45 days. And that's why a moratorium provides the space and the time to get it done.
Any public speak, Mr. Chairman?
Hang on a minute.
Okay.
What other thoughts do you have? Anything else?
I've always been a big believer in the process, and if we want a moratorium, we'll vote on it through the process, whether it's 30 days or 45 days. It is what it is.
So how do we take that step to draft something that might be?
Well, I mean, I think you want to have Chuck's involvement. I think you want to be clear exactly what it is you're trying to prevent, because the way this is presently drafted, it only applies to one piece of property in the town.
Okay.
It only applies to one piece of property.
That's right. It's a site plan and a special permit. There's only one piece of property that allows propane by a special permitted site plan. So this is specifically targeting one piece of property the way this is drafted. I don't see anything in here about change of use. So that's my point, is that it's hard to comment on this thing until we have something that's drafted before us. Because what this would allow is change of use anywhere else in town.
Okay.
That this board trying to not prevent that. All it's prevented is the way it's drafted is special permitted site plan. There's only one piece of property where that could apply right now. And the fact is, if you pass this, let's say it does get passed, it's a very simple way around it. File the application before it takes effect. So I don't know what you're buying yourself. But again, that's why I'm saying I think it's important to be clear what it is that you're proposing, because you're not proposing any change of use here, the way this is drafted. Anybody can come in with an application to say, I want propane in another piece of property, this moratorium, the way it's drafted, would not help you.
George, is that accurate with this current draft, the way that it's written?
Well, it says no site plan applications is required by Article 4 special permit. It doesn't say anything in here about change of use.
George, is that accurate with the way this is drafted now?
I'm not totally clear on what Ray is saying. It is clear what he said. There's only one piece of property right now in which bulk storage of propane is permitted. So
the effect of this, effectively, this only impacts that one piece of property.
And that's
Now,
true for
not to
LP
say that
gas as
somebody
well.
can't propose tomorrow to change the zoning regulations to allow bulk storage of propane in some other zone.
Right.
I mean, they could clearly do that. Then you would have to have a public hearing to amend the zoning code to allow bulk storage of propane in whatever zone whatever it was.
That's why I'm just saying, we need to just articulate, if your intent is to also not allow anybody in town, anywhere in town to apply, to apply for a change of use, a change of what's permitted in the zone, that's not covered by this.
I'm not sure, I mean, that's a different kettle of fish in terms of the moratorium to prohibit, a moratorium that would prohibit amendments to the zoning regulations.
And
That's
that's
a
just
whole other thing that needs to be reviewed. I don't know
Exactly.
whether
That's my point,
I'm not
is that-
familiar with that aspect of
I
moratorium.
don't think this would prevent over the next year somebody else coming in. Now, it's true that they couldn't apply for a site plan or a special permit, but they certainly could get a change of use in place. And you would have to permit that. So I'm just saying that maybe this needs to be looked at a little bit more. And then I think it would be good to have public input for and against it and have a discussion.
Okay, so how do we get that done?
So that would be appropriate.
Somebody would need to draft it. I think that for the next meeting, the commission would take it up, and if they approve, send it out for public hearing within the time frame that is necessary, depending on what's being proposed.
And at that time, that would be the appropriate time for public comment.
I believe so. Now, we already did read one letter into the record from a member of the public, so to some extent, there's already been public input taken. But until you have something that's actually discusses exactly what it is we're proposing, I think that's a more appropriate time to get that published and let people vote for and against it, come in and provide comments to us, and then we can decide what to do.
All right. Well,
That's one person's opinion.
right.
I think the basic construct of it is really fairly simple. You have to define what it is you're trying to not allow. You have to define the period of time during which that won't be allowed. And you have to define what geographic places you're not going to allow it during that period of time. Presumably what you're not going to allow is you're not going to allow anyone to make an application for some type of activity, whatever that is, bulk storage of propane and other chemicals or whatever, before a certain date, during which time you're going to be doing some kind of study, presumably, in certain geographic areas. So whatever those geographic areas are, that's important substantively, but it's also important procedurally, because as I said, if those geographic areas fall within either of those two places I mentioned, the amount of time for noticing is different than the amount of time that's otherwise required for public hearing notice.
Correct. So, Walter, you seem to have a lot of input on the initial thing. Is this something that you could work with George to come up with a draft? Is that a workable plan?
Sure, I think George has gotten quite close already, of course. But
right.
yeah, we'd be happy to go over the last couple of things, and we can review it as a group with public input at
Right.
the first September meeting.
Well, I think it's the third.
On September 3rd.
I would like to make an exception because I value what Mr. Natra has to say. So, Mr. Natra, could you keep it to a couple minutes and give us your input right now?
First, I'd like to ask, did you all receive the copy of this bulk storage and retail sale of propane report that I sent out to every commission member? Did you all get that? Did you all get a chance to read it?
Didn't get a chance to read it all.
Could I just review this briefly?
Well,
Because I think it would solve a lot of problems, and
Well,
if you just give me a...
see, the problem is I want to give you the respect of a couple of minutes, but not a half hour to read it
No,
all
I'm
out.
going to give you a half hour.
How about 2 minutes?
Well, I'll try.
Please.
Have to be very fast. First of all, Victor Anatra, 2614 Boston Post Road, Guilford. I think the solution to the problem, as I've tried to express many times before, is definitions. The zoning board can regulate definitions. In your own charter, it says general, the words used in these regulations shall have the meaning commonly attributed to them. Doubts as to their precise meaning, application, or interpretation shall be determined by the Commission in accordance with the purpose and intent of these regulations where the context so permits. I just want to give you an example of that. For example, farming. This board has defined what farming is. The first definition that defined it was the cultivation of land for the growing of vegetables, grains, grasses, trees, herbs of fruit, or horticulture for the raising of livestock, farm animals, except pigs and fur-bearing animals, fish, birds, bees, or the producing of milk, commercial, floriculture, and other similar pursuits, excluding commercial kennels. Now, why the zoning commission chose to exclude pig farming in their definition is their right, and therefore it is not allowed, even though pig farming is a legitimate farming operation by most definitions. Now, that definition was valid in the Guilford zoning regulations in 2002. The definition of farming was again changed by the commission, and it was Article 3273-240 on the definitions, and it turned out to be a 5-page definition concerning farming with appropriate restrictions and separations between commercial farming and non-commercial farming and agriculture and livestock, etc., etc. Just making that point that the commission has a right to define. You've never defined bulk storage and retail sale of propane. If you define that, you'll be able to avoid a lot of problems that we're facing with this situation. The request made by the Sullivans on October 16, 2013 Planning and Zoning meeting was to allow bulk storage and retail sales of propane to a particular parcel defined as Moose Hill Road or the Boston Post Road. In a letter submitted to Chairman Bauer, it was requested, our office has submitted this text amendment to the zoning regulations to permit the bulk storage and retail sale of propane in a CD zone. Throughout the letter of request, Attorney Beatty uses the term also 8 times in his presentation to the Commission, bulk storage and retail sale of propane. The amendment you approved was, in addition, the bulk storage and retail sale of propane on parcels of land containing less than 4 acres, etc., etc. The best description or definition of what the Sullivans have asked for and what the special permit amendment allows is for the retail propane store similar to what Ocon has on Route 1. Bulk propane is stored 1,000 gallons. There's retail sale of propane tanks, refilling of barbecue tanks, selling of related gas appliances. That fits the description of what's allowed under the special amendment. To contrast that, Ocon also has a bulk propane storage terminal on Soundview Road. Both operations are quite different. They're not the same by any stretch of the imagination. Instead, we're asking for retail sales of propane, but instead we have a proposal for bulk storage terminal, a bulk storage industrial plant, a bulk storage pumping station, bulk storage transfer station. So bulk storage and a transfer station and a terminal are 2 different things. As was noted before by Commissioner Bauer, that a person, if I wanted to, if I was a survivalist and I wanted a 20,000 or 30,000 gallon tank in my backyard, right now, I can put it in. There is no restriction. There's no special permit that I have to get. I could just dig a hole and put it in. Anybody in this room can do it. There's no regulation that prevents that bulk storage for my personal use.
So, okay, and I've got that, and I know where you're heading with it, and I think it's great, but I really need to move things along.
Well, if there's no interest in the commission in hearing any more, I'd be happy to stop, but I think it's important that you hear it because it would involve your decision-making process.
Did you send that out to the, what you've done is, because I haven't seen it. It was emailed?
Yeah, it was emailed.
I'll look on the email then.
But, you know,
Let's hear the rest of it at the...
Yeah, at the public hearing. This is a little preliminary right now, and certainly we
Well, it solves the
absolutely...
problem if you define what bulk storage is.
I know, but there's a time and a place for us to do that, and this may not be that time or place.
Well, I do have the backup information
Yep.
to support this, and having a moratorium is really, it's a moratorium on what? Hazardous materials, is that just propane? It says in your minutes here that it's hazardous materials. What are Maybe Walter, you could define what hazardous materials are?
I was looking for a review of hazardous materials in general. I mentioned LP gas and propane as the most likely applications that may upset that review. If there are other additional types of materials that would be appropriate for us to place a moratorium on during the review, because they are also likely to skew or make a problem for a review, I think that it would be appropriate for us to include those.
Okay. All right. Well, again, I value what you have to say. I think it's great that you are as involved as you are. Thank you. But again, okay. Where are we at? That was correspondence. Next up is a public hearing date for coastal resilience and we were going to work on that, right?
I got it. It's
Okay.
already done.
Thank you.
What I'm asking you to do is set November 18th as a public hearing date to consider the coastal resilience plan and also to officially transmit the draft plan to the Board of Selectmen.
So moved.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Good, done.
Is there,
I said November 18th today.
Yeah, November.
November 18th.
That's of this year.
I'm sorry?
where are there copies of that?
I have an electronic copy of it. There will shortly be a copy on the town website. There'll be a couple of hard copies, one in our office, one in the library. I can email it to you. It's a massive document.
It's huge.
Whatever form you want it in, I can get it to you.
25,000 pages?
No, not that.
Obamacare. Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Amend Article 12, Committees of Guilford Planning and Zoning Commission bylaws. This is dealing with quorums and what constitutes quora. That's right, quora. What constitutes a quorum in a meeting? This comes about because in the past we have had meetings and we've been kind of lax on holding meetings when there's not a quorum present. It's something we've always done because many of the subcommittees don't really have any teeth. They don't enact anything other than making a suggestion to us or a recommendation. However, rules are rules and we should have them. And in the case of absence of anything on our part saying what a quorum is, we use Robert's Rules of Order, which says a bare majority of 51% or more. So, there are some situations where we might have a certain amount of members and we might have as many as, if we have a 10-member commission and 4 show up, is that a quorum? That might be a quorum. Okay, if there's 6 and 3 show up.
It's a quorum, but for the town, it's not.
Okay, so we were going to discuss what would be a better way of establishing what a quorum is, so that there are times during the summer when people are busy and they're on vacation and they're away, and we are just really taking basic testimony, or taking ideas from folks, and it's not really high impact, highly critical information, but we shouldn't do it if we don't have a quorum, and it's up to us to decide what a quorum is. So, I've had some people suggest that they could be a percentage of people. If there are 30% of the members, 33% of the members are better, then that's the quorum. Or, a quorum could be 4, or a quorum could be 3 or 2. During some discussion with staff, talking about what if a quorum's 1? And then, if you were leaning over your backyard fence talking with your neighbor, technically that would be a meeting. So it can't be 1. Probably shouldn't be 2. So, anyone have thoughts on this?
Well, actually, I did take a little bit of a look at it, and I started with the dictionary definition. Taking a look in the American Heritage Dictionary and Collins English Dictionary. In both cases, they say quorum is a number of members of a group or organization required to be present to transact business legally, usually a majority. So they fixed the definition at majority. I then went to Black's Law Dictionary, which is sort of the Bible of lawyers, and they define quorum as a majority of the entire body, the number of members who must be present in a deliberative body before business can be transacted. They cite that in both the houses of Congress, a quorum consists of a majority of those chosen and sworn.
There's some cases that they cite in there too where they come across with the same idea of a majority of the members, and basically they wind up by saying in the absence of any law or rule fixing the quorum, it consists of a majority of those who are present to act. Taking a look at our own bylaws, in Article 7, Section 5, it defines a majority of the voting members of the commission, including an alternate members, where acting in a particular case shall constitute a quorum. So for our purposes of the full commission, it's got to be a majority. In addition, Article 7, Section 8 says that unless otherwise specified, Robert Rules of Order shall govern the proceedings and meetings of the commission. So that could be construed to apply as well to these other meetings. And when I took a look at Robert's Rules, they say the definition there also says that it should approximate the largest number that can be depended on to attend any meeting except in very bad weather or extremely unfavorable conditions, Robert's Rules. However, according to Robert's Rules of Order newly revised, the requirements for a quorum is protection against totally unrepresentative action in the name of a body by an unduly small number of members. So I think the whole thrust of this is you don't want an unduly small number of members to dictate the outcome of the full committee, commission, or whatever, and indeed our own commission requires a majority to be a quorum. So I think the key consideration is to fix the number, whether it's 2, 3, or 4. 4 works fine if there's, 5 or 6, but if you have 10 members, fixing it at 2, 3, 4 is a problem. So it should be a majority, I feel. But given that aside, I'm not sure that we could really change the bylaws of this particular commission. If you take a look at Article 6, Section 1, an annual organizational meeting shall be held in the first regular meeting in April, at which time revisions may be made in the bylaws and officers shall be elected. Said revisions and election of said officers shall be a part of the minutes of the annual meeting. I call the Commission's attention to the current set of bylaws that we do have. There's only been 3 amendments to these bylaws since they've been put into effect. Those dates are April 4th, 2001, April 2nd, 2003, and April 6th, 2005, all of which happen to be the first meeting in April, which is the annual meeting. Now, there is Article 13, which does say that these bylaws may be amended by a majority vote of the regular and alternate members of the Commission only after the proposed changes have been read and discussed at a previous regular meeting, except that the bylaws may be changed at any meeting by unanimous vote of the entire voting membership of the Commission. Somewhat of a conflict with the section that we did read, but with any court or other organization, they're going to try to harmonize these two. So to me, it looks like these apply only to the April meetings, and the precedent in the history of this commission has been to only modify bylaws at the first meeting in April, which is the annual meeting, which is what Article 6, Section 1 says. So I sort of wonder, first of all, if we want to make it something formal. To me, a majority is clear what the intent is of all the definitions. And I just wonder if we can even modify these bylaws except at the annual meeting based on the fact that the only time they ever have been done is that, and based on Article 6, Section 1. So,
There's one other question that was raised earlier, Walter, was that if you don't have a quorum at one of these subcommittee meetings, the Robert's Rules, you can't transmit business, period. But does that mean you can't have a meeting? I mean,
No.
Can you still have a meeting and discuss things? I mean, which is kind of what these committees do anyway. They don't really...
It's deliberative action. You cannot take deliberative action.
Make a motion
Make
and
a
decide.
motion and vote
But you
upon
can-
it without
If you only
that.
have 3 people, you can still have a meeting and discuss things?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so that motion that you can't make, that's not the motion to open the meeting or close the meeting. It's a deliberative action motion.
That's right.
And this comes about because of a reporter who wrote a scathing article that really questioned whether we should have a meeting that can be opened or closed. And I agree, it's certainly the intention and words sort of point towards, if you're going to take action, if you're going to in some way advance the business of the committee. But in the case of where we're only formulating ideas or asking questions of people, I can't see that as something that should be prohibited. If I'm wrong, absolutely, please.
Yeah, I mean, the thrust of the Robert's Rules of Orders is to say that a small body dominating the outcome of the whole meeting. So to me, any action where you're going to take to make a recommendation or vote on a recommendation is something that could be
That would require.
problematic.
Right.
In terms of having a discussion on items and not taking any action, that shouldn't be a problem. I mean, with this commission, unless a majority is present, we cannot vote on applications and take action. We can still meet and discuss, business before us. It doesn't require taking an action.
So what do we do in recognition of what you just said, and I agree 100%.
Yeah.
What do we do? Do we just say, all right, if there's
Well, I think-
one or two people, you can meet, but you can't take action? Walter?
That's basically it, or you say that you leave it at a majority. I mean, I think there is a problem with attendance, okay, but I don't think the way to fix that problem is by trying to put a fixed number in. I think the way to do that is to discuss with the members who aren't present, who are on the committee, to indicate that they've made a commitment to it and need to attend majority of the meetings. There's actually, I don't have
So
this-
there is an
yeah.
absentee, you get thrown off.
In this commission, you can be thrown off for not attending meetings. In most of the other commissions' bylaws that I have seen, I haven't seen them all, but several that I have seen have a similar type of attendance requirement, or you could be asked to leave. I would suggest, using that regulation here and asking people to make a commitment to the committees that they're on to attend those meetings. That's the way to address it. And right up front, when individuals are appointed or asked to join these committees, they be, queried as to their availability and their willingness to make a commitment to do the important work that a lot of these committees have.
So you're saying that it should be two prongs, one is the attendance issue, and then the other is if it's not, and I'm
Yeah.
trying to fathom it out, if it's not real taking action, but it's more just gathering information, then that would be okay. And do we just say that, and that's the way it is? In
Yeah.
other words...
Or what we do, the easiest and simplest way to do it, because sometimes you're going to get into an issue of, is it just deliberation, or is it investigation, or is it more towards taking action, is probably not to go forward with the meeting unless there is a majority present. We don't do that with this commission. When there have been one or two occasions I'm aware of in the last 10 years or so where there was not a quorum present and we had to postpone the meeting. If you have a majority but less than the 7, the applicant can waive the requirement for 7 sitting commissioners and take their chances with the ones that do vote, but they cannot waive the lack of a majority.
So that seems in contrast to what you just said, where if it's not a deliberative action, then you can have the meeting.
That's right. What I'm saying is because it's too difficult to tell what is a deliberative action, what's just discussion, what, my suggestion is the meetings don't go forward without a majority present, in keeping with the thrust of Robert's Rules of Orders, which are what apply to these meetings. So my suggestion is that the meeting, if there is not we do just what we did with this last meeting where there wasn't a quorum present and the meeting was canceled.
Yep.
And the way to handle that is not to change this. The way to handle it is to talk with those individuals, confirm that they've made the commitment to support this important work and that they will be present at these meetings, or replace them with individuals who can't.
Easier said than done.
Well, I know, but I'm just saying that it's not, I think by setting a number, an artificial number so low, 3 would work if there's a commission of, 6 people perhaps or more. But if it's 10 and you only have 3, that doesn't seem right that you would want just 3 people to vote on, the work of that particular commission or committee.
Walter?
I agree that I think that though we might have a little conflicting provision in our bylaws, I agree that we really can't amend our bylaws except at the first meeting in April. In terms of setting rules for subcommittees, I don't think that that requires an amendment to our bylaws.
Well, then why was one proposed to do that?
I'd like to be
Okay.
recognized for 3 minutes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, in reference to Robert's Rules of Orders, then I will recognize Commissioner Corbier for 3 minutes. Go.
I think that in terms of amending the bylaws, I don't think that it's necessary to amend the bylaws to handle a quorum issue. As we mentioned with all of those definitions, there's the definition of set by law. I know that, as you know, a lot of the parties, the two major political parties in town have lower quorum requirements for a lot of their meetings, say 40% of the membership, I believe, for the Democrats. And also, you know, there are other types of limitations for quorums, for quora. In this instance, also, I think that we have regularly considered the recommendations of subcommittees without having received them from a quorum of members. I think that we have, for a very long time, gotten recommendations from subcommittees that didn't have 51%. And then we put them into our regular process, which included notice, which included a public hearing, which included the other standard structural protections, because there's no requirement that these things actually come from a subcommittee. We did that just the other day with the industrial zone this 1 lot per acre restriction for the industrial zone. That was received from the zoning subcommittee when the zoning subcommittee only had 2 of its 4 members present. And I think that that recommendation from the zoning subcommittee was appropriate, even though we didn't have 51%. I also think that regardless of whether or not the recommendation was appropriate, I think that our structure here meets the statutory and legal requirements anyway. So I am concerned about having a meeting where, say, there's 1 person present. I know that, you know, we do want to give as many opportunities for open discussion and fora as possible. So I'm worried about canceling a meeting where we've assembled a brain trust of, say, 11 people with varying expertise and fewer than half of them show up for various reasons. I'm worried about that it will restrict our ability to add valuable expertise to committees where they can't come 100% of the time. But I also think it may actually end up being irrelevant, because I think that since almost all of the work of these subcommittees is recommendations, I don't think that we're in a dark area when we lack a quorum, have a conversation, and then the Planning and Zoning Commission, with its very strict structures, considers that recommendation. But if we are, I would like to deal with it, because we've been doing it a lot for a very long time. Yeah.
Hold on.
I'm over 3 minutes.
Sir.
I think out of this, maybe in my own mind, one of the things that has come to my mind is that if you look at the regular seated commissions, I mean, we have 7 members, 2 alternates. Wetlands has 7 members, 2 alternates. And we've always thought that the subcommittees, well, let's pile on, let's get as many members as we can. And maybe that's not really a good idea. I mean, the chairman has the prerogative to create a subcommittee and to try to find the people to be on that subcommittee, but maybe it ought to be more, the actual number of people. Maybe 12 isn't good. Maybe we ought to have, for the chairman of the commission, some guidelines that say, hey, look, it ought to sort of be the same size as the Wetlands Commission or the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Okay.
That way, then you have a set number of people, and you know what a majority is.
Okay.
For what it's worth.
Stephen, I saw your hand up.
Well, I have to, first of all, I think, Walter, you need to make a distinction between what you're talking about. You're talking about the zoning and the planning. Okay, those are not subcommittees, those are standing committees. There are subcommittees sometimes off of that, like Table 5 was a subcommittee off of that. But I still think, and I've said this to Rich before, and I think I've said it to you, I think that if you concentrate too much authority in too few people, you don't get the whole purpose of why you have a larger committee or subcommittee or commission, and that is because you want differences of opinion in there. You want different backgrounds looking at things. And if you concentrate it and you say, oh, 2 or 3 people can do it, and because it's a committee or subcommittee, I don't think that applies. They still apply, you still go by Robert's Rules of Order. And what happens in that committee or subcommittee goes back to this commission. And actually, if it's a subcommittee, it goes to the committee first. So you have another layer there, so you can get more people involved. So maybe you want to do it on a subcommittee, but a committee, standing committee is a whole different thing. But when it does get back to this commission, it's given more weight because of the source of where it has initiated. And to say that, well, gee, just because it goes to public hearing doesn't negate that. Okay, I think and one of the reasons why we're having such a problem getting people to meetings is there are a lot of people on boards, commissions, committees, subcommittees that they volunteer for something and they don't show up, and they shouldn't be volunteering if they're not going to. But this particular time of year, we have, on the planning committee, we have people who are out of town because it's the summertime and they're away. I mean, you can't judge by that. And yes, it's a problem, but my understanding is, and this was coming, from over the years and from looking at Robert's Rules of Order, and that is that if you don't have a quorum, you just can't, you can't vote on anything, but you can meet, you can discuss. And that's my understanding of Robert's Rules of Order. And Ray, you pretty much,
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to, my concern is really updating the bylaws here to make that hard and fast. I mean, I suppose it's up to each chair to determine how they want to conduct the meetings that they have of the committee that they're the chair of, and making those calls. But, one of the concerns I just have is that sometimes the line between what's deliberations, what's just chewing the fat about something, and what's actually putting something down on paper that's going to go forward is a gray area, and now you
understood.
leave yourself open.
I was just addressing Walter's comment that, gee, it wouldn't be applicable for this body, but for anything else that does work for this body, I don't think that's a good argument.
All right, well, I think that's pretty good. Thank you for doing all that research. That's
No
great.
problem.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I understand what you're saying, but my problem, and I think it was that Mr. Cox, this is nothing to you personally, okay? But when I was last in town, there had to do with both propane. I think Mr. Cox was on the committee. And my problem was holding a public meeting at 5:30. The normally considered working hours for people are 9 to 5. You have a public hearing at 5:30, it's almost, it almost says, okay, anybody who works, it keeps most of the public out. When I talked to Mr. Cox about it, his response was, well, we're all volunteers, and hey, we have to make it when we can, people need to go home and eat. Now, I think Mr. Cost had a good suggestion, and Mr. Bauer, in the sense that if people are going to volunteer, then they have to show up. And I know there's no remuneration for these jobs. However, it's inappropriate to volunteer and then not appear. And
You're right.
It's not my problem that somebody else has to go home and have dinner or whatever else it is. Public hearings have to be at a time that most people can make. I mean, and no offense, but I think that's ridiculous.
Well, you pointed...
And it borders on exclusion, unconstitutional. I mean, you're not making a public hearing available to the public.
Well,
that's my problem with
and
it.
your point is well taken. Maybe, Steve, maybe we can discuss having 1 or 2 meetings at a later time and seeing if we get a different kind of attendance. Again, trying to be flexible. I know everyone wants to have dinner and has things planned for the evenings, but maybe 1 or 2 meetings at 7:30 instead of at 5:15. We'll try and we'll see if that encourages better attendance by the members.
Rich, I have committed to that when we near completion of the project, in this case it's propane, that we will then have an evening meeting purposely so that people can attend and here and get a report from us of where we are and get their input.
So, and that's great. Do you think that maybe the next meeting of the planning commission, we can have at 7:30, just one, to see if we have a different kind of attendance? Only one meeting.
I don't have a problem with it, but it should certainly not be the next one. You know, we're trying to get people, get the committee forms, let's get.
Okay, so within the next month, we'll have one meeting at 7:30 and see what kind of attendance we have. Would that be agreeable to you?
I don't think it's necessary. And contrary to what you said, public meetings are on all times of the day.
So the answer to the question,
I don't want to argue with you. The public, the definition of meeting is out of order.
Okay, that's not the issue here.
stop. This is a real meeting. We're going to have it that way. Mr. Copsa said he can't have a meeting at 7:30, and he can't. He is the chairman of the planning commission, and it's not an argument. We're not going to have a fight with him. This is what he can do, and he too is a volunteer, and we have to respect his time. I would like to see that, but we can't do that right now. So let's keep the meeting in order. I think we have finished our discussion of this right now. Are we in agreement? Thank you. All right. We have some good news. No bills. No, we have great news. Mr. Anthony Cathiero has volunteered to join the planning committee. Thank you so much. I am thrilled. I am truly happy to appoint you to the planning committee, and it's great work, and I think you're going to do great stuff. So thank you so much on behalf of everyone in Guilford. All right, we have a mission statement that I would like to read to everybody with my feeble eyes. This is a mission statement that was agreed upon by the members of the West End Committee and forwarded to me to sort of say this is their committee mission statement. I'm going to read it right now. I think it's pretty good. The mission of the Route 1 West Planning Committee is to develop a comprehensive plan that directs and focuses future growth of the area in Guilford along Route 1 from Joan Drive to the Brantford Town Line. This plan will endeavor to balance economic growth with the protection and preservation of the natural beauty that exists and acknowledge this area as the gateway to the town of Guilford. To that end, the committee will be considering existing zoning and various uses permitted within those zones to determine how or whether the existing zone should be modified or changed. New uses or activities that are not currently allowed but may be appropriate or desirable from an aesthetic or functional perspective may also be explored, will also be explored. The committee will actively involve the local community by allowing them to participate in planning sessions and incorporate their ideas in the final plan so as to minimally impact the quality of life of the residents and businesses along this corridor and preserve the character of this valuable town asset. That is their mission statement, and I think it's a good working plan. So they're going to work forward on that mission statement, and I applaud it. I think it's great.
Just one issue I would point out on our bylaws, the committees, section 4, special committees, which I guess this is one, may be appointed by the chairperson for purposes and terms which the commission approves. So I think they can certainly make suggestions in terms of what the...
So you're saying that it has to be voted on by the commission?
Yes.
Okay, so let's have a vote.
Well, this was just the first time I've seen it. I mean, I'd like to take a look at it and review it.
Sure.
And discuss it for the next meeting. I don't know if it's fair to call for a vote when this was just distributed this second.
Well, okay, so why don't we, in the next meeting, we'll hold a vote on this.
Concerns about it? I don't know. I haven't read it.
Okay, and we have no problem waiting 2 weeks.
Okay.
That's fine. I'm sure 2 weeks, Ray, you have an opportunity to review it?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. So we'll vote on it, yes or no, up or down, in 2 weeks. We have some bills. No, we don't have any bills. There are none.
Great.
We have some minutes that we sent around for the 8/6/14 regular meeting. Did everyone have an opportunity to review them?
Yes.
And do they look right?
Yes. They look fine to me.
Could I have a motion to approve?
So
these
moved.
bills?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
All those in...
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Good night, everybody.